Right, so the news yesterday was sadly dominated by the story of some 3,000 pagers used to deadly effect in Lebanon. But this has, of course, begged the question of where these devices came from and how Israel had them. Was it just a hack to make the batteries overheat and explode? Was there more to it than that, and who made them if so? Initial claims that this was Motorola might just have been wrong. Despite that company having, it would appear, some hard to dismiss connection. So who really supplied them? The claim being made and heavily carried in the media that those carrying these were all Hezbollah, but of course that's impossible to know. Even if ostensibly true, you could never in a million years be sure the right person was carrying the pager at the right time, let alone ensuring such devices were sold to only members of Hezbollah. How could you possibly be sure? And besides, when thus far has Israel exactly concerned itself about the collateral damage of innocent people? These devices could have been set off in a shop whilst someone was driving, whilst in a queue. It's impossible to be sure only those targeted were harmed. What Israel has done here is a war crime and an act of terror, and whilst they deny involvement still, I think we're past the point of taking any notice of that. And indeed, where those pages appear to have actually come from, if the company in question's words are to be believed, is a lot more disturbing and most definitely does point the finger to the blue and white state. Right, so this has been a massive story dominating some headlines over the last 24 hours or so. An awful attack in Lebanon that saw people's pages explode in their pockets has created a lot of speculation regarding how exactly Israel managed to do this. There's no doubt really in people's minds who was responsible for this after all, is there? But this is an unheard of type of attack, isn't it? Or is it? However, the timing of it, as tensions reached a tipping point between Israel and Lebanon, very much point the finger at Israel as the obvious suspect. But how did they do it? Who supplied the devices? How were they made to explode? Is there a link to Israel to directly implicate them in what is an appalling war crime? At time of writing, 9 people have died from injuries sustained from the devices, including a 10-year-old girl. I'm sure she's as guilty of being Hezbollah as so many other children, thousands of them killed in Gaza, were guilty of being Hamas, though, of course. That is Zionist logic, is it not? A further 2,750 have been injured, 200 critically so. This strikes me as the very definition of a terror attack, therefore. How about you? Do you think differently? But of course, there has to be an investigation into all of this. Of course there does. We need to know how Israel pulled this off, if indeed it definitely was Israel. And one of the first logical questions you ask yourself is, where did these pages come from? Who made them? And are any other people with devices made by the same manufacturer at risk of their device blowing up in their pocket too? Of course, on one hand, we're talking about pages here, aren't we? These things went out with the Ark, didn't they? Well, clearly not in some parts of the world. I dare say this is part of the problem and why there's been little in the way of questions asked thus far about who made them, since we here in the West, well, we don't use these things anymore, do we? If it had been exploding iPhones, though, I dare say there would have been a global manhunt for the perpetrators by now. That, sadly, has an awful ring of truth about it. The people in the Middle East, Muslims, people with brown skin who use pagers still, are worth less somehow. That is actually part of this story, though. I alluded a moment ago as to whether these things have happened before, and, well, they have. Israel have used mobile phones in the past to house explosives before. They did it in Gaza. I know many people have been opining about why Israel need to drop bombs when they can house explosives in phones, but it's because the people of Gaza have been there and done that in the past, and Hezbollah, for their part, thought pagers made them safer. So not only does this reinforce the belief this was Israel, and actually CNN have confirmed that it was Israel overnight, despite official denials still, but begs the question of how Israel have managed to infiltrate the pagers now as well. How have explosives made their way into so many pagers, or have Israel developed the technology to cause such devices as pagers or phones or anything that happens to use a lithium-ion battery into a mini explosive? In which case, who made them becomes all the more relevant, because anybody speaking out against the Israeli regime would be wanting to get rid of their devices fast if they're made by the wrong sort of company. Now, some initial reports came out said Motorola was behind this. They weren't. Motorola is, of course, a big global manufacturer of telecommunications equipment, and it's a US company. So there was certainly every reason to surmise that the US, ever so loyal and chummy with Israel as they are, might have links between one of its companies and Israel as well. And certainly such links do exist. And a thread by Mint Press News journalist and rapper, Loki, spelt these out. Motorola developed a special encrypted system tailor-made for the Israeli military, unconnected to any civilian networks. It was the product of a joint project between Motorola Israel and the Israeli army named Mountain Rose. The aim was to prevent counter-surveillance by resistance forces in the region. Motorola also set up the Wide Area Surveillance System, known as Moto Eagle, for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. This system is essential to the settlement network and apartheid wall infrastructure. Motorola also supplies the Israeli police with the Astro 25 communication system, through which the officers interact with each other. Motorola has also provided key components for Israeli arms companies like Rafael and Elbit Systems subsidiary IMI Systems. The company has also gone as far as sponsoring conferences held by the Israeli Ministries of Intelligence and Defense. Certainly all of this information is the sort of stuff that puts Motorola in the frame as pro-Israeli and possibly the perpetrators involved here. And even though this has turned out to not be the case as far as this pager attack has gone, anyone with BDS motivations might choose not to get a Motorola. So who is it then? Well, this is the image that gave things away. A mangled remnant of one of the pages, which has made its way to social media, which still has the distributor and model details on the back of it that are still legible, which led to the realization that all of these pages were actually supplied by a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo. Now, they are furiously denying any knowledge of involvement, but have pointed out exactly how this was possible. And it has disturbing connotations, once again, for the pervasiveness of Israeli interests in foreign governments. And to spell that out further, here's an excerpt from CNN's revelations I alluded to a moment ago. CNN has learnt the explosions were the result of a joint operation between Israel's intelligence service Mossad and the Israeli military. While the Israeli military has said it will not comment on the explosions, both Lebanon and Hezbollah have blamed it for the attack. Iran also blamed what it referred to as Israeli terrorism. Speculation has mounted over how low-tech wireless communication devices could have been exploited. The New York Times reported Tuesday that Israel hid explosives inside a batch of pagers ordered from Taiwanese manufacturer Gold Apollo and destined for Hezbollah. A switch was embedded to detonate them remotely, it added. Gold Apollo's founder and chairperson told reporters Wednesday that the pagers were used in the attack were made by a European distributor. Su Ching Kwang said his firm had signed a contract with the distributor to use the Gold Apollo brand. So Mossad, Israeli Foreign Intelligence and the IDF were involved with a European distributor of Gold Apollo pages. But as coverage by Reuters has expanded upon, these pages were altered by Mossad at production level. So were they produced in Taiwan and only distributed by the European manufacturer or distributor, or was the European distributor also a manufacturer? Gold Apollo are saying they had nothing to do with this. But not only that, but this was done to some 5,000 pages, of which 2,000, of course, therefore, clearly remain undetonated. Only 3,000 have so far exploded. A new board was apparently added by Mossad inside the pages that contained up to 3 grams of explosive. Another circuit board inside a small electronic device would be very difficult to pick up on any kind of scanner. It wouldn't stand out. Yet all it took was for the pager to receive a certain coded message and the device would explode. So who is the European distributor / possible manufacturer then that let Mossad turn its products, produced under license by a Taiwanese company, into miniature IEDs? Which country has had Mossad infiltrate it in such a manner as to aid and abet Israel in what is, in no uncertain terms, a terror attack? The company in question is allegedly BAC Consulting Kft, based in Budapest in Hungary. It's a limited liability company, only registered back in 2022, which is rather recent, rather weird. Operates out of an office building, which is the registered address for multiple other companies apparently, and is registered in the name of a self-described business developer and strategic advisor called Christiana Rosaria Bársony-Arcidiacono. I bet I've said that all wrong. At least that is what her LinkedIn says. She is apparently also a scientist, however, with several papers to her credit on the website Academia. Certainly authorities are wanting to speak to this person, I would imagine. At its heart, though, a European country appears to have had Mossad working with one of its companies, a relatively new one. So questions for Gold Apollo in Taiwan, I imagine, over their vetting of who they give distribution licenses to make pages Israel knew Hezbollah were adopting, knowing phones were unsafe as they already did, in order to conduct a terror attack within Lebanon at some indeterminate future time, which would obviously result in civilian injury as well. Impossible to know different, isn't it? Therefore the decision was made that that would be an acceptable price. Deepening the plot further is the fact that Gold Apollo, upon receiving remittances from BAC for sales made of the pages they'd distributed, were apparently being routed via the Middle East. Just who exactly is running BAC then? Israel itself, possibly unbeknownst to Gold Apollo? Why did Gold Apollo not investigate this further? This story is going to roll on a bit further and strikes me as yet one more war crime to add to the ever-growing list Israel have listed against it. Ongoing Israeli allies, once again, like the US, the UK, the EU, of which Hungary is of course a member state, if they continue to support and aid Israel going forwards beyond this, they are in no uncertain terms promoting terrorism and violating international humanitarian law, and risk ever more being found guilty of complicity. This has been one of the deadliest cyber attacks in recent times. There is no way Israel could know who they were actually going to be targeting when they set these devices off. But they also didn't seem to care much about that. There's no excuse to defend this rogue state a moment longer, in my view, and any such politician or government doing so should be justifiably and rightfully condemned for that. While imports to Lebanon via some Mossad tampering in Hungary might be the big story of today, Israeli exports to Russia are quite another, especially seeing as how the US and several Western European nations have hurriedly slapped sanctions on Iran for allegedly doing the very same thing. Why not Israel as well then, when actually one of their guys has admitted to doing it? Check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.